Friends and enemies. This match is set for one fall. Making their way to the ring, they have endured years of discrimination, overcome boundaries, and breaking glass ceilings everywhere. These are the African American wrestlers of the past, present, and future.
Bienvenue, party people, and welcome back to Wrestle History. We are finishing our three-part series on the African American women pro wrestlers of the past, present, and future. Now, some of the women in this episode started their pro wrestling careers before 2015, but the linear passage of time is a construct used to help us cope with affinity. So, deal with it. Our first entry is Brandi Rhodes. Now, Brandi Rhodes, let me read, spent most of her career as a ring announcer in the WWE. After completing her master's, she signed a developmental contract with the WWE in 2011 and was assigned to Florida Championship Wrestling. She began working as a ring announcer on weekly episodes of Superstars. In July of that year, she started ring announcing duties at NXT under the name Eden Styles. She filled in as a ring announcer on SmackDown on the July 15th and November 11th episodes, and had a match on July 16th at Florida Championship Wrestling SummerSlam-orama. This match was a battle royale. In December, she was released from the WWE at her request. But in 2013, Rhodes resumed her role as a ring announcer on NXT. In 2014, she began a vlog as Eden that ran until January 2015. And this was posted on the WWE website. By October of that year, Eden was a regular ring announcer and backstage interviewer. She was also an announcer at WrestleMania 31. In May of 2016, Rhodes was granted release from her contract with the WWE after her husband, Cody Rhodes, was released as well. And this is a side note, okay? I know that people have in-ring names. I know kayfabe is a thing, and sometimes we like it. Sometimes kayfabe just needs to stay kayfabe, and when it gets broken, it feels weird. All this being said, the shock I felt when I found out that the Rhodes family's real last name isn't Rhodes. I feel like I'm a different person now. Like, there's no coming back from that. Anyway, at Wrestling Under the Stars, Brandi Rhodes was in her husband's corner during an intergender tag team match between Maria and Mike Bennett. She continued on the independent circuit until both her and her husband were signed to TNA. They made their TNA debut at Bound for Glory, where they attacked Maria and Mike Bennett. Because the only way to properly bury the hatchet is in the backs of your enemy. In 2017, she teamed up with Moose to take on Crazy, spelled with two Z's because they're edgy, which consisted of Crazy Steve and Rosemary. And sometime later, Brandi Rhodes dropped TNA because allegedly, TNA was asking for a percentage of her non-wrestling related appearances. And Brandi Rhodes is an enterprising, smart, no-nonsense taking businesswoman. She knows what's hers, and what's hers is not TNA's. Rhodes spends more time on the independent circuit until the advent of AEW, which her husband co-founded. Rhodes was named the Chief Brand Officer, or Chief Brandi Officer, of the AEW. Now, this is important, because with Brandi Rhodes becoming the Chief Brand Officer for AEW, this made her the first African-American woman to hold an executive position in a major wrestling promotion. With AEW, she was able to grab a partnership with Culture City, a nonprofit that makes large-scale events inclusive for people with sensory needs. But Brandi Rhodes is wrestling for the company as well, establishing herself as a heel after she interrupted a triple threat match between Britt Baker, Nyla Rose, and Kylie Rae by stating she would be adding Awesome Kong into the mix. She made her AEW in-ring debut at Fight for the Fallen, defeating Allie with the aid of her palsy-wowsy Awesome Kong. She also wrestled at Casino Battle Royale, and then she and Kong created the Nightmare Collective, which later brought in Luther and Mel. Because the Nightmare Collective didn't go well with fans, the line was scrapped. But sometimes we end up in places we never thought we would be. Brandi Rhodes had been figure skating for 17 years before she dropped that to pursue a broadcasting degree and then turned wrestler, and now she's sitting at the table of a wrestling promotion in an executive position. And AEW is doing really well. And all this time, she's worked twice as hard to get there, overcoming racism within the ice skating world, within the wrestling world. So, Brandi Rhodes, we salute you. Some people are born bosses. Some people have bossness thrust upon them. And some people achieve bossness. It's a rare occurrence that one person can be all three. Mercedes Kestner Fernando had been a wrestling fan since childhood and enrolled in the Chaotic Wrestling School in 2010. She made her pro debut the same year under the ring name Mercedes KV and won the women's title in 2011 after claiming victory over Alexis in an I Quit match. In 2012, she signed a developmental contract with the WWE and was assigned to NXT, where she was involved in a storyline where she kept receiving love letters from a secret admirer that turned out to be a jealous Aubrey Marie who didn't like that Banks was making bank. And she had a few feuds with Paige and Bayley, but her feud with Charlotte Flair in both NXT and in Raw is stuff of legends. Their fights look like they are trapped in this curse where one can't live while the other survives, so they gotta take the other one out. She developed her boss persona a little bit before her feud with Charlotte Flair when she was teaming up with Summer Rae. And this persona and her incredible in-ring work carried over when she was moved to Raw as part of the Diva Revolution. And this is when she teamed up with Naomi and Tamina. But in 2016 at Royal Rumble, she announced that she wasn't working with Naomi and Tamina anymore, and they attacked her for being disrespectful and for letting everybody in their business. This led to a tag team match at Fastlane, where Banks teamed with Becky the Man Lynch to defeat them. There was a triple threat match between Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, and Sasha Banks for the Divas title, but the title was retired in favor of the Women's Championship title. The match was set for WrestleMania, and Banks failed to capture the title. After a hiatus, Sasha Banks returned and reignited her feud with Charlotte Flair with an aim to capture the women's title. Banks got a mystery partner in Bayley for a match against Flair and Brooke. And Banks and Flair would make history as the first ever women's Hell in a Cell match. And they were the final match of the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view, which is a big deal because the last match of a pay-per-view is usually the most anticipated match of the night. Banks and Bayley would later become a really strong tag team, united in the power of friendship. But until Banks helped Alexa Bliss secure a win over Bayley, the two would get into fights backstage until they were told to do friendship counseling. Eventually, they reconciled and the duo became the Boss and Hugs connection, not to be confused with the Rainbow Connection. In 2017, Banks and Bayley won the women's tag team title and successfully defended it against Nia Jax and Tamina at Fastlane. However, they lost the title to the Iconics at WrestleMania 35 in a fatal four-way. Banks went on hiatus again, but returned to Raw as a heel. And when she reunited with the Women's SmackDown champ Bayley, she roped her into being a heel as well. You know, sometimes friendship is magic, and sometimes friendship is beating the snot out of Charlotte Flair and Becky Lynch. That involved another Hell in a Cell match. In 2019, Sasha Banks was drafted to SmackDown, and it was announced that she would be the captain of the Women's SmackDown team at Survivor Series. Now, after WrestleMania 36, the Boss and Hugs connection took another hit, as Banks and Bayley began teasing a potential feud between the two. But they were able to get it together enough to reclaim the women's tag team title. At the horror show at Extreme Rules, controversy ensued after Bayley donned a ref shirt during the Sasha Banks vs. Asuka match and counted the pin for Banks. This wasn't an official win, but Banks would get the women's title later on down the road. This would make Banks and Bayley the first ever women's tag team to hold both the tag team title and their own singles titles as well. However, Banks would drop her title to Asuka at SummerSlam, and both of the team would drop their tag team titles to Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler. And plot twist, Bayley would attack Banks after the match, effectively A, ending their team, and B, turning Sasha Banks' face. The two squared up at, guess what it is? Hell in a Cell, where Banks submitted to Bayley for the win. With the addition of the SmackDown Women's title, Banks became the third Women's Grand Slam and the fourth Triple Crown champion. Banks would go on to have a feud with Carmella that resulted in a match at TLC. Are you not into wrestling, but you know Sasha Banks' face from somewhere? Well, if you watch The Mandalorian, you know that Sasha Banks plays Casca Reeves, one of Bo-Katan's little night owls. I would love for Sasha Banks to have a long wrestling career, whether in the ring or in an executive position, then she could do it. She has the talent, the athleticism, and the charisma. It only seems natural that she'll be at the head of the table one day. And what else could you expect from the boss? Adrian Reese trained under Skander Akbar in 2007 at the Booker T Pro Wrestling Alliance, or Reality Wrestling, and competed in various Texas-based promotions. She did appear as Athena on Shimmer Women's Athletes and wrestled in a few other promotions before signing on to NXT in 2015. She made her debut at NXT Dark as Ember Moon in a dark match. And she had a killer winning streak until she lost to Asuka. But let's face it, who hasn't lost to Asuka? I certainly have. But she did win the NXT Women's title when Asuka vacated it due to injury. In 2018, Ember Moon appeared at Raw after WrestleMania 34 and teamed with Nia Jax to defeat Alexa Bliss and Mickie James. She took part in the 2019 Women's Royal Rumble and suffered an injury that took her out of the fight until she made her return at WrestleMania 35. There she was eliminated by Lana during the Women's Royal Rumble. An ankle injury kept Moon out of the 2019 draft pools, and she stated that she would be out of action for an indefinite period of time. But you can't keep the war goddess away from war. Ember Moon is back at NXT, much to our joy, and we are living for every moment, every second that she's out there on the ring. Okay, so my notes say that I need to talk about the Eclipse, so I'm going to talk about the Eclipse. So I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with the works of one Stone Cold Steve Austin, but his finishing move is called the Stunner. And it's a cute little move. It's real great. I would recommend getting on YouTube and watching the Rock sell the Stunner, because The Rock has the best sells for the Stunner that I've ever seen. Anyway, so basically the Eclipse is Ember Moon getting on the top rope, right? Performing the Stunner, but doing it with a flip. And it is, it's so awesome. It's so awesome. Bianca Belair entered the WWE in 2016 after her CrossFit career ended prematurely. Now, she was encouraged by pro wrestling vet Mark Henry to try out, and she was assigned to the WWE Performance Center at Orlando. Her debut came at NXT at a Battle Royale, and she enjoyed a killer winning streak after competing in the Mae Young Classic. On April of 2018, she participated in the Battle Royale at WrestleMania 34, and for the rest of the year, she was pretty much involved in a feud with Nikki Cross and defeated Cross before moving on to the main roster. Belair worked mostly as this thing called a tweener, which is neither a heel nor a face. That's a weird thing to be called. But she did team with the Sky Pirates to defeat the Horsewomen in a 6-way tag team match. She also feuded with Mia Yim and started taking names wherever she went. She was also on the women's NXT team that curb stomped both the Raw and SmackDown teams in a 5-on-5 elimination match at Survivor Series. In 2020, she won the NXT's Women's Battle Royale, and do you know what foreshadowing is? Coming up on an example. She also entered the 2020 Women's Royal Rumble, where she entered as number 2 and eliminated 8 superstars. In WrestleMania 36, Bianca Belair turned face by helping out the Street Profits, and she also established herself as a member of the Raw roster. She was then drafted to SmackDown, where she defeated Billie Kay and Natalya to qualify for a spot on the SmackDown team at Survivor Series. Bianca Belair then used her powerhouse abilities to win the 2021 Women's Royal Rumble, which means she can go up against anyone with a title that she likes best. Now, it's been teased that she is going to square up with Sasha Banks at WrestleMania, which, yes, I want to see Bianca Belair versus Sasha Banks. But Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler were sticking their noses where they shouldn't have been sticking them and are going after Belair and Banks. On the plus side, we have Sasha Banks and Bianca Belair as a tag team. On the downside, we don't know if this is going to affect Bianca's decision on which title will she go after. So, will Bianca Belair take on Sasha Banks at WrestleMania? Well, folks, this is the end. We've looked at some of the most astounding figures in pro wrestling history. Not just pro wrestling women's history, but pro wrestling history. Wrestlers that have broke barriers and set records, and I just love them. I do. Do you have a wrestler or wrestling moment you would like to see in wrestle history? Let us know in the comments down below. Well, folks, we'll see you next time.